Hello, and welcome to the latest presentation of the Rift Valley webinar series. My name is Martha Booker-Johnson, and I am the host for today's talk. If you are participating in the live webinar, you can submit questions or comments in the chat module of the Zoom application at any time during the presentation, or ask a voice question by raising your hand once the presentation is complete. Today's speaker is Stanislav Beletskiy. Stanislav is a research fellow at the Russian Academy of Sciences. He lectures on field linguistics and lexicography and conducts research on Isanzu and Gogo languages. His interests include the languages of the Tanzanian Rift, their documentation and description, their formal morphosyntax, and lingubotany and ecological knowledge encapsulated in them. Please join me in welcoming Stanislav as he gives his talk, Lexical Borrowings in CiGogo, Semantic Domains, Sources, Nativization Strategies.
Thank you, Martha. Good evening, everyone. So before every presentation, I do a short pre-talk explaining how it happened that I'm dealing with Gogo or with Nisanzo. So I worked at the University of Dodoma for 7 years. So 2022, I came back to Russia. So now I'm working here at the Russian Academy of Sciences at the Institute of Linguistics at the Department of African Languages. But I'm still curious about beautiful Gogo language. So I'm still doing research on it based on some materials that I still have not processed. So I have like fairy tales, pure stories, some other data, which is still waiting for analysis. But today I'd like to talk about the borrowings that I was able to identify in an interesting source about this language in a book published at the beginning of the 20th century. It's a sketch, ethnographic sketch of the tribe of Wagogo tribe, as it was called at that time, done by a German colonial administrator, by a doctor who was a doctor by profession, Heinrich Claus. But let me start with the presentation. So a bit about the language. So Gogo, so in English way it's spelled Gogo, in Swahili it's spelled CiGogo with K. In Gogo it is spelled CiGogo with just one letter C that distinguishes the orthography of CiGogo or CiGogo from Swahili orthography. This is the only difference in the usage of letters that distinguishes these two close languages, because they belong to the same group, G group, classified by Guthrie and then reclassified by Maho. So Gogo is placed in the group G11, but many years ago, Robert Botany suggested to reclassify it and to place it into J group based on some phonetical and lexical parallels with lacustrine languages. But the common classification is still the same as done by Guthrie. So Gogo belongs to the G group and it's labeled with 11. It is spoken in the central Tanzania, in the capital of the country, in the capital region, in Dodoma region. It's a big question actually nowadays if it is spoken in Dodoma because of the urban development. So Dodoma is becoming a real capital nowadays. So this movement that was initiated by the previous president, by Magufuli, is not getting hold. So Dodoma is really developing into a big city, and many people are coming to Dodoma, and they are somehow, they're taking the existential sphere of this area, and the speakers of Gogo, the initial inhabitants of these lands are moving away from the capital city. They're moving away from the capital region because they sell their lands and they go somewhere else to find a new home. So it's a big question actually nowadays where CiGogo is spoken. So the heart of Gogo is not that, it's not that firm anymore. However, the position of CiGogo, the Ugogo, can be seen as a periphery of the Rift Valley. So this is a topic that links this language with the general theme of the webinars. We are talking about Rift Valley languages. CiGogo is not a Rift Valley language, but it borders Rift Valley. And I hope there will be some interesting points that give a ground for further elaboration for those who are interested purely in Rift Valley languages. So it's a big language. It is spoken by more than 1 million people. And it is safe, it is very vital, it is developing, it is labeled in Ethnologue as developing languages on the scale of vitality. It takes the point number 5. So in the Atlas of Tanzanian languages, it is also listed as a non-problematic language that is spoken in several mikoa regions in Tanzania, around Dodoma, of course. Also in Ethnologue, we can find some metrics that measure the lexical distance or lexical similarity of CiGogo with neighboring languages. With Hehe, actually 50% of vocabulary is similar with Sangu, with Kimbu, with Niramba. But I was not able to find the description of the methodology of these measurements. So I supposed these measurements were done by a Swedish list, by a kind of Swedish list, because there are many versions of Swedish lists. It might be 92 item Swedish list that was used in the lexico-statistical comparison done 1999 by Bastin, Kupitz, and Mann. Anyway, I imagine it was done in this way. Further, we can distinguish at least 4 varieties of dialects. So not everyone likes the term dialects. That's why I say varieties of this language. Central Gogo, like the standard language, the variety that is considered to be standard because it was chosen by missionaries to translate Bible into it. So this is the standard variety of CiGogo, called by native speakers Chinyao-Gogo. Further, there is an East Gogo or Chitumba, which is a kind of amalgamation of CiGogo and Kagulu. Chinyamba or West Gogo, which is a kind of amalgamation with CiGogo and Nyaturo, and Southern Gogo, which is called Chitiliko. Anyway, in Ethnologue, there is not such a language listed, but Professor Ruge Malira names it as a dialect of CiGogo. So, by the way, so the most elaborated description of this language belongs to Professor Ruge Malira. So he shared the manuscript with me 2014 or 15, I think, and I'm still wondering if it is published. So if you know if it's published, please let me know so I can cite it properly. And so far, I write everywhere that it is a manuscript. So on the map, we can see, so I put the ticks to those languages which are connected to CiGogo through similarities, through lexical similarity. But we can see it happens on the periphery. So around Ugogo, we can find similar languages or mixed language varieties, but some points are blank. So on the map, it's number 33. I think, yes, this is Nyamwezi. So what's wrong with Nyamwezi? Why there is nothing, I mean, there are no measurements done for Nyamwezi and CiGogo, or there are no lexical items shared by these 2 languages, which cannot be true actually, because they're all Bantu languages. Okay, CiGogo belongs to G group, Nyamwezi belongs to F group, but still these languages have common lexical stock. So it raises questions. And then the other way is to look at the relatedness or the interaction of lexical systems with non-Bantu languages. So with Bantu languages, CiGogo lexical system interacts in a number of ways. So with some languages, it shares the lexical stock. With other languages, it exchanges the lexical stock actively. So mixed varieties come into being. But what about Bantu languages. So obviously, CiGogo has been in contact with them for a couple of decades, maybe centuries. So what do we know about this interaction? What do we know about the language contact that might have happened? Is there any evidence? If there is this evidence, then it must be evidence in form of lexical borrowings. So I decided to look at CiGogo vocabulary and to try to identify borrowings from non-Bantu, from neighboring non-Bantu languages, from Nilotic languages, from Cushitic languages, but not from mixed languages, because I'm not familiar with them and I was not able to find any dictionary of Sandawa, for example. So I will be looking at Nilotic languages, at Cushitic languages, and Nyamwezi. So Nyamwezi is a special case. Why we don't know anything about lexical similarity between CiGogo and Nyamwezi. So in doing so, I will pay attention to semantic domains, to sources, source languages, and to nativization strategies. So how CiGogo digested all those borrowings. And first step would be to look at the at what is happening right now, what borrowing processes are happening right now within CiGogo, and for doing so, we should analyze the current linguistic ecology. So, as it is well known, Tanzania is following the typical triglossia model, typical for African countries, with three kinds of languages functioning at different levels within the same society, within the same region, or even within the same family. So minority languages, Gogo is one of minority languages, but minority is a misleading term because like Sukuma language should be called minority language, but in Tanzania it is a majority language because there are like 9 or even 10 million speakers of this language. But anyway, these are ethnic community languages. Maybe it's a better term to label them. So in this model, Herman Batibo calls them minority languages, but taking in mind that they have minor importance in language policy of the country. So the language policy tends to neglect them. Like it's in case of Tanzania, minority languages are prone to passive assimilation from Swahili. So the other level of this model occupies the dominant indigenous language, which is Swahili in our case. So this is the language that unites the nation, that unites 120, 130, we can find different numbers, ethnic groups as the language of the nation. And at the top of this hierarchy stays an ex-colonial language. So in case of Tanzania, it's English. So this language links this society to other countries. So this language functions at the educational level, at higher education. And this language is symbolic for this idea of development, of this achievement that the country tries to show. Like English is associated with technological development. Minority languages, so this is what Muzali and Rugemalira are saying, they exist in a hostile political environment. They are not permitted in the schools, in the media, or in politics. I'm not sure if it is hostile, but they are not permitted and people know it. And during my stay in Tanzania, during 7-8 years that I spent there, I couldn't see any hostility toward minority languages, toward ethnic community languages. But people know where to use them. So they use them at family, with their families, but they don't use them at gatherings, political gatherings, for example. So they know perfectly which language to use in what situation. So this situation creates prerequisites for code switching, code mixing, bilingualism, or borrowings from higher ranked languages, which we can observe or which we can test on the example of linguistic landscape of Dodoma. And I was able to find 2 articles of Professor Lexical, written by co-authors, where he describes linguistic landscape of big cities in Tanzania and particularly of Dodoma. And he comes to the same conclusion, which is depicted in this model of linguistic ecology suggested by Herman Batibo, that ethnic community languages are not prominent languages of billboards and shop signs, that English is the most prominent language of billboards and shop signs, and that Swahili takes the middle position of this hierarchy. But in the same article, the authors make like an important note that the majority of Tanzanians don't know English well. So the idea of the prominent of English being prominent language of billboards and shop signs based in the symbolic value of this language, not in the real usage of it. So very few Tanzanians are bilingual with English. Some of them use this language really. What was serikali, politicians, they run the business in English. Those who have university degree, so they know English, they use English, but the rest would like to know English, but not all of them have a chance to learn the language. So these shop signs in English catch the attention. They create like a perception that the goods promoted in this language are worth the money they've been sold for. So another study is a piece of my research that I did 2017, but published only the last year, 2023. Being conscious about this language policy, I was so much surprised to see these banners around Dodoma. They are trilingual. So Lusikelo and Dukula examined bilingual signs, but I came across with trilingual advertising campaign. So Tanzanian Telecommunication Association or company, TTCL, launched a special campaign breaking this unspoken taboo on the usage of ethnic community languages in public sphere. So this is a governmental company. They were allowed to do so. So when I saw these posters, I visited their office and I asked them this question, like, why are you doing this? Because this is somehow not permitted. So why are you putting these phrases, mbukweni idodomia tumefanikisha? Okay, mbukweni idodomia, this is CiGogo, tumefanikisha, this is Swahili. Home 4G light and so on, this is English. So I can understand like Swahili and English are functioning there legally, but what about CiGogo? Why do you use it? And they told me this advertising campaign had several objectives. So one of the objectives the main objective was to promote the 4G internet. And the other objective was to link the services of this company with the patriotism. So they wanted to create this expectation that if you are using a TTCL product, you are a patriot somehow. That's why they used the phrases and vernacular languages where this campaign took place. So it was case not only of Dodoma, they did it in several cities, in big towns, in 5, I think, and also in Zanzibar. However, intended message was not decoded. So I made perception test with 50 native speakers. I showed them these billboards and I asked them a question, what is being advertised? So only 2 persons were able to identify the advertised item. So they realized it was 4G internet. The rest couldn't decode the message in an intended way. But however, all of them, like majority of them, said they felt proud of being Wagogo, and they thought their language and their culture is being advertised in this way. So this is about the role of English. Of course, this is an official language in Tanzania, but Wagogo don't use it. So they are not bilingual, maybe with some exceptions, but the majority of the population is not bilingual with English. And to prove it, I would like to cite another research done by Professor Lexical as an outcome of the project where everyone knows about Languages of Tanzania project that aims at description of Tanzanian languages. And the outcome of the project, one of the outcomes was several dictionaries, I think for 20 plus languages. And Professor Lexical took several dictionaries available at that time, including CiGogo dictionary published by Professor Rugemalira, and he identified borrowings from Swahili in these languages, in these Bantu languages, in these Bantu Tanzanian languages. So in case of CiGogo, he was able to identify 15 borrowings from Swahili and just one borrowing from English, but through Swahili. So the only English borrowing here is send money. The other borrowings come from Swahili or from other languages through Swahili, like the English borrowing, but we are not interested in tracing the very origin of these lexical items. So in the ecology that we have only English and Swahili so far. So 15 words come from Swahili, one from English. It's worth mentioning that those semantic domains which are empty are core semantic domains. And they are somehow immune to borrowings, which correlates with the high vitality status of CiGogo. So this is one of the indicators of language vitality. This immunity against borrowings in the core semantic domains. So cultural vocabulary is borrowed easily, like education, business, modern fashion. So these domains are open for borrowings. They're full of borrowings. But the core semantic domains in vital languages are empty in terms of borrowing. So this is the case with CiGogo. So this is the situation like Hali Halisi, what is happening now, or what is happening at the current historical phase of the development of CiGogo. But what about the past linguistic ecologies? So what were the language contexts? What were the language situations in the past? So I went through several publications that shed light on the history of CiGogo or on the prehistory of Wagogo, of the ethnic group and their language. And I was able to reconstruct the following ecologies. The Bantu-Cushitic contact from 14th to the 17th centuries. This is the formation of Gogo Koine. According to Nyampala, which is actually not a scientific paper, Nyampala was a poet, native speaker of CiGogo, whose life objectives was to document the history of the clans of the ethnic group, and he spent many years in collecting oral histories of biggest Wagogo clans, and then he published a book which was translated into English. So this is not pure scientific material, but still this is a source of information. So according to Nyampala, the first inhabitants, the first Bantu inhabitants came to what was later Ugogo, what became later Ugogo, the land of Wagogo. They came there in the 14th century. But by that time, the territory was inhabited by Cushitic people. And Bantu people just assimilated some of Cushitic people living there. Other Cushitic people left those territories. So this is the prehistory of CiGogo. But in the 17th century, a certain tribe, a certain ethnic group moved into that area that gave rise to the CiGogo language. They brought the language system that was incorporated into Bantu Koine and later became Proto-Gogo language. So the next crucial ecologism, next crucial linguistic contact is Bantu Nilotic contact, which happened during the 18th, 19th centuries. This is where Maasai people, Iparakuyu people came to Ugogo. Maasai people were and are still skilled warriors, so they threatened Wagogo. They took their cattle, and Wagogo people could not chase them from their lands, but they resisted. They still resisted somehow, and they even mimicked Maasai people to threaten the other Bantu neighbors. So they just mimicked their weapons and their clothes. And at that time, they adopted cultural vocabulary from Iparakuyu, which I will show on the next slide. The next linguistic ecology is Bantu contact. So this is where Nyamwezi language was brought into Ugogo with caravan trade. And from Nyamwezi, they inherited some cultural vocabulary as well. The next contact is, again, Bantu contact, CiGogo or Wagogo Wahehe, with whom they were Adui, enemies on their northern territories, on their northern borders. So Hehe, Wahehe used to raid the southern parts of Ugogo. The outcome of this linguistic contact is a mixed variety dialect of CiGogo called Chitiliko. And the last important linguistic contact happened in the 20th century. This is Gogo Swahili English vertical contact that triggered the creation of ethno-linguistic identity. So the Wagogo we know today is a recent invention. In the 19th century, 18th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, they did not associate themselves with the language. They associated themselves with their clans. So this was the basis for identity. Even they were speaking different languages, but when they shared the common origin, they had the same identity. So identity was based on the clan identity and on the territories that those clans controlled within Ugogo. That was the source of identity. But in the 20th century, during the colonial time, British people created the idea of tribe. So it was easy to control the territory and to govern it, having grouped different ethnic groups into bigger tribes. So this is how Wagogo were created, based on the language. So the language was used to translate the Bible. This is how the standard version of the language was created at that time. And around this standard version of the language, the ethno-linguistic identity grew up. So these linguistic ecologies are hypothetical constructs. So I try to find linguistic evidence to support them. And I found this evidence in the book, which I introduced in the beginning. So this is a wonderful description of the life of this ethnical group at the beginning of the 20th century. So the book, the report, was published 1911, but I think it was written quite well before it. So this is the very beginning of the 20th century. So the book has a lot of pictures, photographs, a lot of schemes. So it's really useful in understanding the culture in deep details. And in this book, the author uses the CiGogo concepts and explains them. So we can see different types of buildings. So these buildings have their names in CiGogo language, and the author mentions them. So he introduces them as a terms. He treats this concept as terms. And then further, he explains them in German. So he uses German orthography to write them, which looks quite funny. So the semantic, the Inhaltsverzeichnis, the content of this book corresponds roughly to semantic domain. So you can see the timber, housing, the Haustiere, domestic animals, Ackerbau, farming, and so on. These are the semantic domains. So I went through this book and I identified 293 concepts, CiGogo concepts, which the author uses to describe the life of this ethnic group. And I was able to identify 21 borrowing out of 293 concepts. So this is around 7% of the total number of these words. And the distribution of these borrowings is presented on this slide. So again, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this zero result is very important for us. It might be even more important than those results where we have some numbers, because these semantic domains are core semantic domains, and they are close, they're immune against borrowings. And we could see the prerequisite for the high level of vitality of CiGogo even at that time, even at the beginning of the 20th century, when the number of native speakers was not that big as nowadays. Nowadays, there are more than 1 million, but the language was vital. So this is one of the indicators, like craft trade measure number, hygienic conditions, customs adherence, totemism. So these domains were closed for borrowings. At least I was not able to find any borrowing within this vocabulary. So it was possible, based on the comments done by the author, it was possible to attribute some of the items to the donor languages, to the source languages. So I was able to find 4 sources: Maasai, Nyamwezi, Cushitic, and Arabic. So these are the languages that contributed to CiGogo in terms of cultural vocabulary. So the most productive language is Maasai language. So from Maasai, there are 11 borrowings in CiGogo at that time. I tried to track the etymologies through the dictionary, through the online dictionary of Maasai dialects made available by the Summer Institute of Linguistics. So I found that online dictionary on their website. So the first one, like there are 5 items that belong to the semantic domain clothing and jewelry. So fashion, cultural domain, not the core domain. Lo ido, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, easily transportable pipe. So this the definition is my translation from German into English. Easily transportable pipe. So in the dictionary, I was able to find something similar. The word sounds Loita. The Loita highlands, the homeland of the Loita Maasai, constitute the southern part of Narok district, Kenya. So this is my assumption, that Wagogo associated the item with the name of the people who introduced it to them. I couldn't find any evidence, so it's just a hypothesis. The next item is Gesehene, so it's written in German way with umlaut, but it should be A, of course, in modern orthography. Steep leather. It sounds very similar to a word akesen, to tie a sarong onto oneself as a skirt tied by a woman. And in the original source, Heinrich Claus describes it as, according to their own statement, they got this steep leather from the Maasai. So a synonym to it is gibise. The other word for head is garanda. The cap made from the rectulum of cattle, heavily rubbed with the red clay and butter. So in the Maasai dictionary, I was able to find a word enkaranda, temporary shelter for especially warriors' hair cap. The next item is ngodi. late Maasai style. This is a definition by Heinrich Claus. The word possesses typical CiGogo morphology and can be considered a case of structural borrowing, meaning extension. The second semantic domain with borrowings from Maasai is weapon, war, hunting. So Maasai helped Wagogo to be better warriors. So they gave them the weapons. Lemeta, although a wide blade shape, is similar to Maasai word lemat, type of bee, bigger than normal bees that appear more aggressive and dangerous in stinging. It can be assumed that the cut of this blade was compared to the bee sting, but this is a mere assumption based on phonetic similarity. Another word is dabadzi, narrow, long blades common among the Maasai. The word looks foreign in CiGogo, but it is not listed in the Maasai lexicon. However, it might be of Maasai origin as weaponry vocabulary. The same explanation with mage. It does not sound a CiGogo word. It's a foreign word. But I was not able to find anything similar in that dictionary. But dictionary is not that big, actually. Yeah? I'm not sure if it contains all the weapon terms. Another two domains, housing and food. In housing, there are two items, dobogo, wooden hooks, that sound similar to Maasai and top. Can be assumed that hooks look like ribs and were named after them by Maasai. So wooden hooks look like ribs. Why not? And sito, this is horizontal whip. That sounds like Maasai esita, fence. The sito whips were used for building walls of traditional houses kaya. And another item, saso, funnel made of bark, sounds somehow similar to Maasai esiorog, leather funnel for feeding baby animals. Modernly, the funnel may also be made of rubber or plastic. So these cultural concepts are presumably of Maasai origin. Other languages donated less items, but still they are not less interesting. Borrowings from Nyamwezi. In the semantic domains, agriculture, food, and domestic animals. Isili, heart-shaped hoya, matama, maize, mapambwa, vessels made from the bark of the miombo tree, lindolo or limpogo, sweet potato, mohogo, cassava, itumbako, tobacco, and kunda, domestic pigeon. So why these words come from Nyamwezi? So Heinrich Claus indicates it clearly. So he says, these items with the names are brought from Nyamwezi, Unyamwezi. Borrowings from Arabic, there is a pair of words, salva, joliba. This is a calf skin which is worn as a festive dress by the male youth. So I suppose joliba is the same as jalab, garment worn by traders from Arabic. I'm not sure about salva. It does not sound CiGogo, but maybe it's a parallel word from another language. So, but they're synonyms. They're like synonyms. They're treated like synonyms by Heinrich Claus. The most interesting part, borrowings from Cushitic languages, which must be many in CiGogo, but I was able to identify only two of them. Domestic animals, mhene, which is goat, and another one is sakami, blood. However, we expect this Cushitic substrate to be rich in those languages, in those Bantu languages, which were in intensive contact with Cushitic languages in central Tanzania. But I'm not specialist on Cushitic languages, and I would be happy if someone would be enthusiastic to go through CiGogo vocabulary to try to identify Cushitic roots. I tried to identify borrowings in CiGogo using the list of subsistence vocabulary from Rotland Mouse paper, but it did not yield any satisfactory results. I talked to my Wagogo informants, one of which is a linguist, but they could not identify any Cushitic. They could not trace any connection to Cushitic languages in this vocabulary. So after we identified the borrowings, we can analyze the nativization strategies CiGogo applied to digest them. So first of all, this is palatalization of velar consonant k with ch and g to j before front vowels. Kitabu comes from Swahili kitabu, so k is palatalized to ch. Ndege, this is palatalized version of ndege. Substitution of trill r with lateral approximant l. Silicale, this is sericale, of course. Restoring the canonical syllable structure, consonant vowel with epenthesis. Cholo from Swahili cho. Suluwale from Swahili suruale. So for CiGogo, it's very important to maintain this syllable structure. It's very, the language is very consistent in this pattern. So you cannot find any violation of this rule. It's CV, 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 sometimes nasals, but they are semi-vowels, semi-consonants. Voice and voiceless stop to avoid the stopping before nasal. So this is the case in sendi, senti, and garanda, encaranda. So otherwise, encaranda would sound something like enjaranda. So this this segment triggers this stopping and leads to the appearance of voiceless nasal. To not allow this voiceless nasal to appear, they avoid this stopping. So calking, making calc, mwinjizwa is a perfect CiGogo word, but this is a direct translation of Swahili mwanafunzi. Assigning noun classes through prefixes. So all these borrowings are integrated into morphological, so agreement classes. So isoko from Swahili isoko. In Swahili, the prefix is zero prefix, so it's not visible on the surface realization, but in CiGogo, there is a visible prefix here, isoko. Mu silicale, soldier from Serikali government. So this language is very persistent in nativizing borrowings. So this is another indicator of vitality, of high vitality of this language. So vitality is the outcome of the extra-linguistic factors, of course, but also it is rooted in the linguistic properties of the language, in its inner functioning. So the strategies the language choose to react to the changes in linguistic ecology are assimilation of weaker languages, so as attested in Ethnologue and by Heinrich Claus as well. So when he says, like, the strongest of Cushitic languages survived until the beginning of the 20th century, but it was not vital at that time. It disappeared at the beginning of the 20th century. So release and reorganization into mixed varieties and the periphery of its areal. At the core area grows through nativization of borrowings and conservation of core semantic domains. Successful expansion into new domains. So the language is used in advertisements and public sphere. Bible was translated into CiGogo 4 times. So church meetings are being held in CiGogo, and creation of multi-layered ethno-linguistic identity. So these are the factors of high vitality of this language, and I try to make a presentation about the third one. Yeah, so the borrowings can be seen as indicators of the vitality of language. So in many papers, borrowings are being analyzed from purely structural point of view, but I tried to address the significance from social linguistic point of view as well. So thank you for your attention. If there are questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We can now begin the question and answer section. The question and answer section will be open to voice questions as well as written questions. If you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand in the nonverbal controls present underneath the participant panel, and I will send you a request to unmute. If you prefer to ask a written question, that is also still possible. You can do so using the Zoom chat module, and I will read out the question. Please remember that the webinars are recorded so that if you ask a question, this will be part of the recording and will be released on the YouTube channel. Marta?
Yes, thank you, Stanislav. Yes, yes, interesting. And I'm interested in the issues that you raised. And I don't know, I have a lot of little things to add and to ask and to, so I'll do a few and then somebody else and you can come back to me. So about the link with the lacustrine area, I was interested also in that Botner article. There's another one by Anneleen van der Veke. I don't know whether you have that one, that also argues for that link with the lacustrine Bantu. And I asked Derek about those proposals because I thought, yes, why not? And Derek Nurse and Gerard Philipson, they link it to Ruvu as part of Northeast Coastal Bantu. and he is adamant that's where it belongs, and he's not convinced by the other one. So I'm just reporting on that. I was a little bit disappointed not getting any argumentation. So something that still interests me. I went through that Rugemalira dictionary, as you asked us Cushiticists to do, to look for loans, and have the same experience that very little that I found. So I'm happy that you looked at the Claus stuff, because maybe we'll find a little bit, but I found some that you don't have in Gambako for the bull and for the goat Ivulati. But the Ivulati and also probably in Gambako, I'm not sure whether this came directly through Cushitic, probably not. Also the blood word, Sakami, is originally a Cushitic word. We had a whole seminar on this by Roland Kiesling. It's on the YouTube. But it's so widespread, it probably didn't come through directly from Cushitic. I'm not sure whether Mhene is actually from Bea. I think Bea is really sound symbolic new formation for sheep by the Cushitic people. Okay, that is for the Cushitic things. I'm not for the Maasai borrowings. I would think this is relatively recent. So if you have a borrowing like for Maasai, I would expect it to be closer, certainly in form to the Maasai form, and also in meaning as maybe a specialization in meaning. But okay, the short one is I'm not completely convinced by your Maasai ones. It's nice to try something, but I would like to see more convincing ones. What Lusekelo did for Swahili is in itself a difficult thing to determine Swahili borrowings in Gogo, I would say. A word like fika, to arrive, is fika in Gogo, but is that the borrowing or is that simply inherited? So I don't know how he distinguished those two and how you would go about that. Let me shut up for a while.
Yeah, thank you for the question and for the discourse on this topic. So this is the first time I'm presenting this material, and I hope to get some feedback and inspiration. This is what I've got now. So I will look into Maasai dictionary precisely. So this question of distinguishing what is borrowing from Swahili and another Bantu language and what is not, I think this is a question that cannot be answered in some cases, but in some cases we can answer it, like Lusekelo did. He took nouns. It becomes even more difficult with verbs. So he took nouns, and this serikali and mu serikali, this is a clear case. They just took the official terminology from national language and used it, nativized it. These obvious cases help to understand how CiGogo nativizes words. And knowing this, we can, I think, calculate mathematically how a certain Maasai word was reshaped in CiGogo. So the items that Professor Lusekelo identified as borrowings useful to see how nativization strategies work to apply this knowledge to the items that were borrowed earlier, which are not that obvious. Yeah, the serikali, musarikali, this is obvious example, and it's good that it is obvious, so we know how it functions.
Tommy?
First, thank you for this talk. Yeah, this is a really interesting topic and something I've actually been thinking about for a while now. I guess first I want to say that my initial exposure to go-go was actually through music. The reason I bring this up is because you discussed a little bit this idea that go-go has achieved some sort of status within the eyes of the government, perhaps, as a valuable ethnic language, one that they're willing to even put into advertisements in order to reach that particular demographic. And one reason that I think that might be the case, particularly for go-go, is that there are a number of successful musicians from the go-go community who have achieved international success. Something in particular, there's a musician, Hukwe Zawose. So the Zawose family is like a famous family of go-go musicians, now primarily based in Bagamoyo. And Hukwe Zawose in particular was very successful on the international stage. He traveled to Europe and to Japan. He, I think, even released one or more records on a record label owned by Peter Gabriel, the British musician. So he was able to bring a lot of attention to Tanzanian musical culture. And I think for that reason, the go-go culture might be viewed by the government as a useful means of promoting the country of Tanzania and its culture. And for that reason, that has also helped to elevate go-go culture and the language along with it. So I just wanted to mention that because it adds sort of another perspective into this idea that go-go might somehow be viewed differently by the government than some other languages. And another interesting link between that and then the discussion of your presentation, I went to the Tanzanian Broadcast Corporation in Dar es Salaam once to try to get some recordings that they were in the process of digitizing. And one of them was a set of recordings from the 1960s and 70s of Datoga musical performances. And there were a few recordings from the Singida area, and there was just one recording from Itigi. And it was very striking because it sounded like a mixture of Datoga music and go-go music. And I have not heard of anyone following up on this to try to research what sort of contact has occurred between Datoga and go-go. But I guess I would recommend that you look into this because there have been Datoga in the Itigi area since the mid-20th century, and that in contact between Datoga and go-go might have served as a vessel for the transfer of some of these Cushitic loanwords that we've been talking about. But you might also find Datoga loanwords as well. And I can give you a couple of links, one to a dictionary by Franz Rotland of a variety of various Datoga varieties. There's a trilingual dictionary, English, Swahili, and then there's Datoga varieties. And then also, I'll give you a link to that recording from Itigi. So again, yeah, just something to look into. So in addition to Maasai, I think you might also find some loanwords from Datoga.
Thank you very much. It would be great to have these sources of data. I was not thinking about songs, but I'm aware that Gogo have this not unique, I don't know, like a prominent singing culture. So nationwide, they have reputations of good musicians. So if there is a competition of musicians, so Wagogo people take the first prize. And recently, a couple of years ago, not far away from Dodoma, they opened a cultural center, Wagogo Cultural Center, and they organize once a year a big festival, dancing festival, Chamwino Arts. Yeah, something Chamwino Arts. Yes. So they celebrate every year, and it's a governmental project initiative. Yes. And I remember the the dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Nyoni, who passed away. So he wrote his dissertation, his thesis, and then several papers after graduation about Wagogo music, Wagogo lyrics. So now I remember. So he was working on that topic. So I forgot about it completely. Thank you, you reminded me.
Just one more comment maybe on Datoga. I forgot to mention that the particular variety of Datoga spoken in Tigi is not very well documented, and is, yeah, heavily endangered. I went to visit there just once, and there are very few speakers left. It's a variety called Bianjida.
So I have one quick comment and then a question. So I noticed you had mage as a weapon term, and kimage is the word for knife in kihehe. I don't know where it's from, but that's very clearly a related lexical item. So they may have borrowed it from the same place, or one got it from the other, I don't know. And then this is sort of related to what Marta was saying, and I was just sort of curious about your procedure for determining what was borrowed, because I've been looking at some of this myself, and Bantu borrowing is such a tricky, slippery thing to look at and try to make any headway with.
Yeah, but Bantu is almost impossible to solve. You know, this puzzle is unsolvable. But this kimage, does it sound hehe? Or does it sound like a foreign word in hehe?
I mean, I didn't necessarily mean that word specifically. I just sort of meant more generally your procedure for determining borrowed words.
So in general, I just looked at those words that Heinrich Claus labeled as names of cultural object or practices brought from outside into Wagogo community. So he commented clearly on it. But if he did not comment anything, just describing, so they build the house in this way, and these are the walls. They call this wall with this term. They call the roof with this term. I just try to imagine, I just try to analyze it morphologically. Is it analyzable morphologically or not? If it was not analyzable, so I suspected it to be borrowing. Because Gogo language, it's very regular. You know, there are no, so I have a corpus of 50 plus fairy tales and some 10 plus pure stories, and it's very regular in its structures. So the language restructures everything in a very straightforward way. And if something is not morphologically Gogish, I would say, then it is a sign of foreign origin. Because this language cannot produce something against its rules.
Mart.
On your first question to us, Stanislav, I don't have an answer, but I need another question. You mentioned there's a publication, or there's a manuscript by Rugo Malera. So can you tell us a little bit more about that manuscript? What is it about? What kind of manuscript is it?
This is grammar of CiGogo written in Swahili. Sarufi CiGogo.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is the one that was never published.
To the best of my knowledge, so it's still a manuscript, but maybe it was published. It was supposed to be published in the series of Languages of Tanzania project, but the project finished and the manuscript, maybe it was not ready by that time. Maybe so it took too much time to publish it, but it was not. It was supposed to be a part of this series of grammar sketches.
But on Marta's question, I still wonder, I mean, a word like Ngodi, or what was the other one, Sasso, in what sense is that not Gogo?
Because there is no prefix.
And with Ngodi, that is impossible in Gogo, to have the Ng.
Yeah.
There's even a present prefix for, by present, I mean an existing prefix for the N class nouns.
They are all marked.
I find a word like Ngoji.
Ngoji, type of bushy plant. Yes, yes.
So Ngodi seems to me a possible shape in Gogo.
Something with this D. I'm not sure if it's possible. So this is something like this Ngoji would be the phonetic shape of D.
And are there no words without any prefix? But S, words like Simo for a story, doesn't that exist?
So Simo is like Simulizi.
Yeah, for the fairy tale, Simo. Simo can exist, then why can't Cito exist?
A good question. So maybe I have to reconsider my.
Maybe you have to be a little bit stricter with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would also say your procedure is good to identify possible borrowings, but to me it would be a borrowing once you have a convincing source for the borrowed word. And then it comes to, yeah, then it's difficult when is everybody convinced or not. But it's yeah, it's a continuing search, I would say.
Thank you. I think those are all of the questions and comments for today. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that recordings of all of the presentations in the Rift Valley webinar series can be found on the Rift Valley Network YouTube page, and entries for each presentation are added to the Rift Valley bibliography. I would like to thank Stanislav again for his presentation and everyone else for participating today. I hope to see you again at our next webinar by Roland Kiesling, entitled Towards an Epic Matrix of the Rift Valley Area, on Wednesday, the 13th of November.